to the fourth program of our 2023 Sawtooth Forum and Lecture Series, brought to you by the Sawtooth Interpretive and Historical Association. I'm Hailey-based, a naturalist at the Redfish Visitor Center. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that here in Sawtooth Country, we are in the unceded and traditional lands of the Agadeka and Dukadeka bands of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. We pay respect and honor to the tribes and all indigenous people who have continuously stewarded this land for generations. Tonight, we are happy to bring you Ed Cannady presenting Seeking Beauty, The Wandering of a Vagabond, which will cover his travels through Canada and Alaska over a 4-month period last year. For those of you who don't know Ed Cannady, he spent his career working in the Sawtooth National Recreation Area as the backcountry recreation manager. Here he cut his teeth at being a summer vagabond, spending much of his time trampling through the mountains, taking photos. He retired in 2019 and began regularly traveling throughout the western U.S. and Canada. In 2022, Ed embarked on a 4-month wander to northern Canada and Alaska. Everywhere he goes, he captures the landscape and its wild inhabitants. We are lucky to have him share some of his photography and personality with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming our friend and CHA board member, Ed Cannady.
As was mentioned last year, actually in the 4 summers I've been retired, I've spent 2 summers in Canada, and then last summer quite a bit of time in Alaska. And I call this talk tonight, Wandering, Not Lost. And I've been calling myself a vagabond for beauty since I read that in a book about Everett Roos. If you're familiar with Everett Roos in the desert Southwest, if you're not, I urge you to read his story. It's remarkable. And they still haven't found his remains to this day, so he remains a mystery. But 16th century Renaissance man Conrad Gessner said, "Men dull in mind find no time for wonder. They spend their time idly sitting at home rather than going out to see what's on display in the great theater of the world." So last summer I left Hailey in May to go see what was on display in the great theater of the Great White North. Immediately made a beeline for Glacier National Park. This is not Glacier. I was supposed to show this slide when I was giving that Conrad Gessner quote, which I absolutely love. But I immediately, that's Athabasca Falls in Jasper National Park, by the way. I want to center my talk tonight around the importance of beauty, awe, and wonder in our lives. And science is increasingly confirming what a lot of us here already knew, how important that was. It makes us better people, enriches our lives. And I'm going to quote from, this is an article that was in Psychology Today last year. These benefits include improvement of memory, lower stress levels, and increased social connection. For instance, most aesthetic perceptions of landscapes, natural scenes like sunrises and sunsets, tend to produce positive feelings of peacefulness, relaxation, and harmony. Yes. So some of you are going to say, well, duh. You had to do research to know that, and yeah, it's good for science to confirm what we intuitively know. When I left Hailey, we'd actually just gotten a big snowstorm here in late May, so I had to go through Mackay rather than go over the pass. Immediately drove to Glacier National Park, my favorite park in the lower 48, and got a good campsite at St. Mary's Campground. Drove up to Mini Glacier, which is my favorite place you can drive to in the park. That campground wasn't open yet. And walked out on the shores of Swift Current Lake and saw this. And I don't know how well you can see him back, but that's a yearling moose running from this guy. And this bear, I know, knew he couldn't catch a healthy yearling moose. And that yearling moose knew it. I could just tell by the way the yearling was running, wasn't too concerned. So I expect this bear was just testing that yearling to see if it was sick, crippled somehow. It wasn't, so he said, okay, never mind. almost immediately, I got there fairly late, got to Mini Glacier fairly late in the day, started driving back, almost immediately encountered this drama. And these kinds of events go on all the time. We're just usually not there to witness it. This bear is after this moose calf. And this cow did exactly what the cow that treated me in Alaska a few years ago did. When there's a body of water nearby, get up against back up against that body of water, then she only has to defend 180 degrees instead of 360 degrees. This went on for 2 days. This bear was so patient, he would just lay down, waiting for an opportunity. Late the second day, I could tell even that this time it was different, because the bear approached the cow and calf several times, but it was like the cow didn't seem concerned, but all of a sudden this time was different, and the bear charged in after the calf, and Mom won. So this cow, can you tell? All 4 paws are off the ground. This bear fleeing so fast. The calf well behind, you can see the cow's ears laid back, the water splashing. She came charging out of there, and the bear knew it. Like, okay, he decided, I don't know how well you can see, but he's got a mouthful of vegetation. He's going to go at a Sally instead. So that kind of awe, I mean, that's a different kind of beauty, but the awe of the natural world, because the grizzly can catch a moose calf or an elk calf in the first couple of weeks of their life. After that, the calves can outrun them. So the bears, those in that they know when the cows are dropping their calves, and they intentionally seek out moose calves, good bits of protein. Glacier National Park bears are almost exclusively vegetarians, but when they can get protein, that's a real bonus. So that was how my trip started. I thought an auspicious beginning. Beauty and awe doesn't just occur in episodes like that or in the grand landscapes, but also in the smaller things. This is more akin to what is called everyday awe. Wildflowers. I could do a whole hour on wildflowers that I saw, and the wildflowers I saw here this year. Wow. Of course I can't, but it's not just the big scenes of sunsets and sunrises. It's also the little things. And the thing about being a photographer and always carrying the camera is I realized pretty quickly the more I look, the more I see. And that will be a recurring theme throughout this presentation. So I drove on north through the Canadian Rockies, and I spent quite a bit of time in the Canadian Rockies over the year. I really like the Canadian Rockies. Pretty familiar terrain, but they'd had a big winter, and so there was still a lot of snow. Some of the places I wanted to go, a backpack trip I wanted to do, I couldn't do because of flooding from the runoff. So I pretty much just hurried on through the Canadian Rockies and headed through British Columbia. I drove past Mount Robson. Have any of you ever been to Mount Robson Provincial Park? Have you actually gotten to see the whole mountain? Yeah. Me neither. It's the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies, and it's always, in my experience, it's always cloud covered. So when I see pictures of all of Mount Robson, I think that's got to be Photoshop. But every once in a while, people get lucky. Yeah. But I drove west of Prince George and encountered the furthest interior rainforest in the world, because most rainforests occur near coastlines. This one was a few hundred miles in from the coast in BC, and I love rainforest. So this was a really nice surprise encounter. And the vegetative opulence of a rainforest is just overpowering, and the ozone and the smell and the feel of rainforest I find really refreshing and rejuvenating. So I really had a lot of fun hiking around in this rainforest. But I proceeded on through Smithers, British Columbia. Pretty fun town, good place to do laundry. One thing on a trip like this, I have a little R-Pod travel trailer, which my former girlfriend called my human bear canister, and it works well for that. You learn where to get a good shower, because my R-Pod has a shower, but I don't use it very often because it uses a lot of water, and then I have to dump it. And So I always look for good places to shower and to do laundry. Smithers had that. So nice resupply in Smithers, and then drove to the beginning of the Cassiar Highway. And if you ever drive to Alaska, I would really recommend driving the Cassiar either up or back or both ways. It's a 450-mile long highway that between Smithers and the Alaska Highway. It's just wild. It's constant wilderness on both sides for hundreds of miles. And the first time I paid over $10 a gallon for gasoline was on the Cassiar. And that the cost of gas, you can remember what it was like even here last summer, I'm sure. The cost of gas curtailed some of the things I wanted to do on this trip, but there was still plenty that I could do. So this was a long row of totem poles that the Haida people had on display at a place called Katwanga Junction, and that's where the Cassiar begins. And this is actually at a place called Teslin Lake in the Yukon, a more recent and better kept totem pole. And I found that really interesting. So you can also find beauty and awe in other cultures. And for me, these totem poles were awe-inspiring. And they're sacred relics, of course. They're not even relics. They're sacred totems to the things that are important to them. On that earlier photo, you might have been able to see, I didn't point it out, the carving of a cougar on top of it, and just represents the orcas and the birds and things that are important to the Haida people, mainly a seagoing people. So this is what the Cassiar, it's 450 miles of mountains. And I just don't have time to, I could spend over an hour on the Cassiar really easily, but big wilderness areas on both sides and just big wild country. There's a side trip you can take off the Cassiar over to a little town called Stewart, British Columbia, and then you immediately drive into Hyder, Alaska, and that's the end of the road. Then that's far southeast Alaska, and then you're on the coast. But that was my first view of a big, massive glacier. This is the Salmon Glacier, and I was able to hike up. The road was closed, still snow-covered. I hiked through quite a bit of snow to get to this view of the Salmon Glacier. And so then I went on through Whitehorse, a couple of days in Whitehorse in the Yukon, which I could move to Whitehorse. I really enjoyed Whitehorse. Couple of great museums and another good resupply place. And at this point I've done a fair amount of hiking, but mainly day hikes just because of the snow and the flooding. But here I'm entering Haines Junction in the Yukon, the gateway to Kluane National Park. And Kluane is famous for three things. A, it's part of the largest contiguous protected area in the world. Kluane National Park, Wrangell St. Elias National Park, Mystic Fjords National Park. I forget what the total acreage is, but just this massive area of wilderness, a lot of big snowfields and massive glaciers. Mount Logan and Mount St. Elias, the second and third highest peaks in North America, are in that protected area. So Kluane is famous for that. It's also famous for Dall sheep and grizzly bears. So on my second hike, a little ways in on the trail, I encountered this sign that says, "In loving memory of Christine Ann Courtney, née Wood, died during an encounter with a young male grizzly bear while hiking the Sheep Bouillon Plateau Trail," which was the trail I was hiking. And it was a really good reminder that, you know, the bears, they don't want to have anything to do with you. They just don't. They want to be left alone. But they can be dangerous. That's obvious, I'm sure, but they can be dangerous if you don't do things right. I read the account of how she died, and they didn't do things right. It didn't have to happen that way. So just like skiing in avalanche terrain, if you're going to travel in grizzly country, you need to know what you should do, and I say practice doing it. I hike alone in grizzly country a lot, and I practice deploying my bear spray. I can get it out, and you don't just practice getting it out. You get it out of the holster, pop the safety, go through the whole motion. And I recommend, once a canister gets 3 years old, I fire it just to stay in practice. And that practicing is important. It has saved me once. But this was just a good sobering reminder. And almost on cue, This guy appeared, and I didn't surprise him. I was walking along singing Bob Dylan songs, which makes anything want to run away. But he saw me. I saw him. He was far enough away where I wanted to go that I felt okay proceeding, and I had my bear spray out, safety off, and then he stood up, and that's when it's like, oh shit. He's concerned about me, I need to be concerned about him. But then he dropped back down, went back to foraging, and I went on my hike. They closed this trail the next day because there were multiple bears feeding along the trail. But that's what I get the most out of in wilderness, and I like being in grizzly country. I really need that, and your senses are, unless you're stupid, and there are a lot of stupid people out there, your senses are fully engaged. You're paying attention to what the wind's doing. You're paying attention to, are you seeing ravens? Are you smelling a carcass? You need to be fully aware and fully engaged. Like, not too many centuries ago, and I used to say generations, but probably more like centuries, every one of us would have been fully keyed into that all the time, moving across this landscape. Every one of us would have known how to build a friction fire instead of just relying on a big lighter or a thermostat, and we've lost a lot of those skills. Traveling, especially solo in grizzly country, which isn't recommended, but okay, it creates for me a fuller, richer, deeper experience, and I just absolutely love it. I need it, and when this next week I'm going to head to Montana and get some grizzly time. So I actually had met a friend and hiked with a friend for a couple of days in Kluane. She's the one who gave me this. I don't normally wear stuff like this, but I wear it because she gave it to me, and so she took this photo, and it just gives you a sense of the scale of the place, and you're seeing 1/1000th of the park here. It just goes on forever. Massive glaciers, glacial rivers. If I had time, I would tell the story of this river, but I don't, so I'm going to go on. But that just gives you a sense of the scale of the place. And as I mentioned, Kluane is famous for Dall sheep. How many of you know what a Dall sheep is? They're like a bighorn sheep, but they're a thin horn sheep, same genus. But our bighorns have really massive horns. Dall sheep and stone sheep, which I'll talk about later, if you can see well enough, you can tell that this Dall sheep's horns are not nearly as massive. So they're known as thin horn sheep, and they are all white. And I have some more photos of Dall sheep, because I just love Dall sheep. I lived in the bush in Alaska back in the 70s, worked as an apprentice hunting guide, never made master guide, wasn't there long enough. And one of the things that caused me to move away from hunting for a while, not at a hunting, I grew up hunting, was taking a hunter out, taking multiple hunters out to kill Dall sheep. I can't do this anymore. They're just so beautiful, and I just felt so connected to them. And I don't know if you can see this grizzly here. There's an old wives' tale that grizzlies can't run downhill. I was told that when I lived in Alaska. And I'm glad I didn't actually have to test that theory when I lived in Alaska. Because this bear, Shalise and I were hiking out from a hike, and this bear was on the opposite side of a steep drainage, running at top speed down this slope that I would have had trouble staying upright on. And he was just full speed. We didn't know why. He was coming towards us. We didn't know why he was running full speed. We didn't stick around to find out. We were able to get around, turn a corner into the next drainage, and start heading out. But pretty impressive watching this bear navigate terrain that steep at that speed. So I camped on Kluane Lake for a few days, and these two subadults, I'm pretty sure they were siblings, were about 200 yards, I encountered them about 200 yards from my camp. And this bear and that earlier bear standing up aren't as close as they look in the photo, because I shoot a 500 millimeter lens, and I cropped the photos so you could see them better. And I was able, these guys were close enough, I could pretty much fill the frame with them. So that's the next slide. This guy I shot from my Toyota, and a Toyota makes a good tripod. So I was able to shoot him, and I just love this photo of this bear. I mean, just the look in the eyes, and it's just such a gorgeous animal, and they are so intelligent. And we often discount wild animals as not being as intelligent as us, or as prescient as us, or as sensually or aware as us, and that's wrong. It's just wrong. They are often, I say, geniuses in their world. And I recommend a book called An Immense World by a gentleman named Ed Young if you want to really be amazed at what animals and insects and other organisms can do. It's just amazing. So we discount other fellow creatures at our peril and our loss. So I could do a full hour on the birds I saw on this trip. I won't, of course. But these guys were a lot of fun. They're called surf scoters, and they're just really querulous little birds. They were yakking at each other, but there would be as many as 40 in a group, and they would all dive at the same time and resurface at the same time. It was so much fun to watch them. I'd never seen a surf scoter. I had to look them up in my bird book. So it was really fun to watch them, and I kind of figured that when they're yakking at each other, they're all trying to decide when they're going to dive. I don't know what else they could have been talking about. And a lot of loons. And I love loons. How many of you have heard the cry of a loon? Oh, good. Most people. It's awesome. It's just amazing. One of my favorite sounds in nature. And a lot of loons on this trip. And I have hundreds of pictures of loons, and I'll take hundreds more. I did encounter 2 new loon species. The Pacific loon, one of the most elegantly beautiful birds I've ever seen, and the red-throated loon. So there's one more loon species, and I forget what they're called, but they're not where I'm likely to be, so I probably won't be able to see that other loon species, but I'm okay with 3 out of 4. But just really cool birds, and a lot of opportunity to hear them in lakes in Canada and in Montana as well. So I don't know, this is a photo that would have worked much better on a big screen. This is Kluane Lake, and perfect reflection, which is rare on Kluane, and the clouds made the photo. And as a photographer, I love clouds. If I get up in the morning thinking about shooting the sunrise and there are no clouds, I'm probably just going to go back to bed. And the clouds provide drama, and I like my drama in the landscape, not my personal life. So I really like clouds. So the clouds made this photo for me, and I really wish I could have shown that big.
Wow.
And this one as well. So I really like, I shoot sunsets and sunrises. 90% of my photos that aren't wildlife are sunsets and sunrises. That's hard when the sun never sets, because it never rises. So in June, at this point I'm in June in the Great North, and the sun's not setting, so I wasn't getting that color, but still great clouds on occasion. But so I proceeded on, heading towards Alaska, and lots of wildlife. I'm not going to talk much about moose. I have some wildlife I will talk more about, but we have moose here. So you're familiar with moose. So I'm not going to talk too much about moose. But I do like to show the fun photos I get. So I drove the Denali Highway, got into it, spent a couple of days in Tok, Alaska, not T-O-K-E, but T-O-K, Alaska. Although T-O-K-E probably would have worked there as well. Drove the Denali Highway, and they use the term highway pretty loosely. The Denali Highway was a gravel road. They're paving a little more of it, and there was quite a bit of wildfire smoke at this point. But right off the bat, I got this picture of a long-tailed Jaeger with a lemming for its dinner. So I'm really happy with that. The first part of the Denali, on the east side of the Denali Highway, you're driving across a high plateau with big peaks on both sides, covered with tundra lakes. So a lot of trumpeter swans nesting. There probably were other swan species out there, but I just got trumpeter swans. And you can see some of the lakes here. That's just what the landscape looked like. Big wild country. And you've got to be prepared. I had 10 gallons of gas, an extra spare, a small compressor, a way to jump a battery. You need to be prepared, driving the Cassiar and the Denali Highway and another road I'll talk about later. But just big wild country, and I just loved it. I hiked way more miles with a head net than I cared to, but it was way better than not having the head net. The flies and mosquitoes were just awesome, and so yeah, I went to take a photo. I would have to throw the head net up over the bill of my hat, bring my camera up with one hand, wave my hand in front of the lens, and then fire the photo and put my head net back down. Same way to get a bite of food. If you're eating, you just like do that, raise it up, get a bite, put it back. So when the bugs were really bad like that, I would, in the evenings, rather than going out to sit out and watch the sunset, which didn't set, I would sit in my human bear canister and drink my favorite Maker's Mark and eat my favorite cookie, the maple creams. If you're in Canada, you do maple. And if you're in Alaska and you bought 5 boxes of maple cream cookies, you do maple. And reading Barry Lopez's last book, Embrace Fearlessly the Burning World, which I recommend to anyone. I drove on, and this photo, it's bizarre color, but it was really weird light. It was just this strange light that you get when the sun never sets and never rises. But the lake I lived on in the bush in the 70s, and I was 70 air miles from the nearest town the lake I lived on in the bush, I could see Mount Hayes, which was about 130 miles from my lake. This is Mount Hayes right here. It's the Hayes subrange. It's a subrange of the Alaska Range. So it was really fun to finally get to see Mount Hayes up close. And this is, I'm in the Big Susitna River drainage here. And the Big Sioux is a pretty famous whitewater river that Walt Blackadar was the first person to ever run that most famous stretch, an Idaho boater. Then I went on to Denali National Park, and I love Denali. It's just 4 million acre park, true wilderness in the truest sense. And of course the highest peak in North America and one of the tallest base to summit in the world. Because it's 14,000 feet of mountain. A lot of, like in Colorado, you're starting at 9,000 feet to go to the top of a 14,000 foot peak. Same way here, Mount Bora, I think you gain 5,000 feet. Denali is 14,000 feet, so just a massive peak. And the common wisdom in the park is if you get to see the mountain, you're a 30%er, because only 30% of people get to see the mountain. Only 15% get to see the mountain base to summit. And so I'm not a 1%er, that's for sure, financially, but I was a multiple 15%er. And Denali is just such an impressive mountain. It's massive and awe on a scale that you don't get many other places. So I really recommend a visit to Denali. They have a pretty interesting travel system where you can drive the first 17 miles of the park road to Savage River, and that's as far as you can take your personal vehicle. To go beyond that, you have to ride the park bus. And the park bus system is awesome. They run very often, and they will stop and let you off anywhere you want, except within like a quarter of a mile of a grizzly, which is part of their policy. And a couple of times they made me get on the bus because of grizzlies, but whatever. But they will also pick you up when you want to get picked up. You just flag a bus down, and if they have room, you can get on and get your ride out. The park road, there's a section of the park road called Polychrome Pass, and the road across that, it's a famously narrow, really tenuous drive. The road was supported by permafrost. The permafrost melted. The road is gone. It's now a sheer cliff face, and I did not put a. So you can drive about, or the bus can get about 45 miles in, so about halfway. The park road from park headquarters to Kantishna at the end of the road is 90 miles. You can only do about half of it. But you can climb Polychrome Mountain and drop back down around the landslide and keep walking, or some people take their bikes on it. which they go along the river to do that. The bikes, they're not going to carry their bikes over the top of Polychrome Mountain. But that's how you get beyond the landslide. And they're actually bridging that landslide, which is going to be an impressive project. I talked to the contractor who got the contract. Said, if you need a project photographer, but he didn't. So a lot of Dall sheep in Denali, and they're just gorgeous animals. They're really almost, I just have almost this cosmic sense around them. They're just so stunningly beautiful. I mean, I think some people get that sense from the thought of a unicorn, an animal that doesn't exist. And these sheep are almost like my unicorns. I just really love Dall sheep, and went to great lengths to get them, to get photos of them. So this, real quick story, and I'm trying to hurry. I'm sorry. I was walking the park road, because you can hike anywhere you want to in the park. To backpack, you have to get a permit for the zone you want to backpack into, and I was able to get a couple of zones I wanted. But you can hike anywhere you want to except for the Sable Mountain area, and that's because there are so many grizzlies there. So you can walk the park road or walk around the closure, and I did both in the 2 weeks I was there in August. And I was walking the road over Sable Mountain, and all of a sudden this bull caribou pops out of the alders about 20 yards away. And I hike with my bear spray here, my camera on a strap over my shoulder, so my camera's on my left hip, bear spray on my right hip, binoculars here. I'm ready for anything. So this bull caribou pops out, so cool. I didn't even have to zoom my lens, pull it up, get a photo, and then he charged me. So this is the photo I got as I'm dropping my camera, and I didn't have time to deploy my bear spray, which will work on a caribou or a bull moose or cow moose even, and so that's good to know. I just reacted and said, "Hey," and stomped the ground, hey, real loud, "Hey," and because he was as surprised at me as I was at him. So big dominant bull, he's going to take out the threat. When I did that, he just went around me, continued on down the road. It all ended happily. So now I've been charged by 2 grizzlies, a cow moose, a bull caribou, and a blue grouse. And I'm thinking, what's next, pica? So that was one of the fun little episodes on the Sable Pass Road, and this is heaven for me. A wild grizzly in its native habitat, big peaks. That's all I need. That is awe and beauty and wonder and simplicity and humility that you can't find anywhere else. You can be in awe of our sockeye and Chinook salmon, as you should be, but they can't kill and eat you. And that's part of it. Part of the allure for me is that something bigger, stronger, powerful, smarter than me, and I get to be in its presence. And there's something very humbling, almost, I mean, I'm reverential toward these bears. Black bears, I don't even take pictures of black bears anymore. I mean, if they were doing something interesting like eating a tourist, I'd probably shoot that. But otherwise, I don't even take pictures of black bears anymore. But grizzlies, I go looking for them. And I try really hard not to be stupid about it. Stupid comes easily to me. But I try really hard not to be, because I don't want to, A, get chewed up, and I don't want to get a bear in trouble. I'm not Timothy Treadwell. So, I mentioned earlier that it's not just the big charismatic megafauna, it's not just the grand scenes that should inspire awe and wonder, but butterflies, pollinators. I could do a whole hour on pollinators that I saw, and this bee, you can see the pollen sticking to the hairs on the bee, and it's gonna perpetuate the vegetative community here, and we stand on the shoulders of pollinators. Because without pollinators, we wouldn't have the vegetative community that we have, and without the vegetative community, we wouldn't have the deer and elk and the ground squirrels and things that eat the vegetation, and without them we wouldn't have the predators, we wouldn't be here. We stand on the shoulders of these insects. So again, I mentioned earlier, the more I look, the more I see. So carrying my camera, and I've always been really curious, but carrying my camera has caused me to look more closely. And last year, even the Alaskans were commenting on what a great fireweed year it was. Just miles and miles of just walls of fireweed with birch forests. And I just was overwhelmed by the beauty of the fireweed in particular. And endless miles of forest with devil club. How many of you are familiar with devil's club? You probably don't want to see it again or hike through it again. It's called devil's club because it's covered in thorns, and it's aptly named. But pretty cool plant. And to get to watch a cow moose eat fireweed flowers, that was a pretty awesome experience. And Steller's jay, I don't know if you can tell, it's eating an elderberry there. Really fun time with a brood of fledgling Steller's jays, and they were just so squawky. And eagles, countless eagles. And you know, Alaska's famous for eagles. It wasn't the time of the year where the Homer Spit was, you know, he's famously covered with hundreds of eagles. It wasn't that time of the year, but I still saw lots and lots of eagles. And this photo reminds me of my 7th grade English teacher, whom I adore. She taught me enough in 7th grade English that I was in honors English all through high school and all through college, based on what I learned from her. And back then, I grew up in Oklahoma, moved to Idaho in my junior year of high school. Back then in Oklahoma, they paddled kids. You got corporal punishment with relish. Some teachers had competition who could give the most swats and all that. Mrs. Turpin never had to discipline anybody. People were scared of her because of that look. And it worked. But again, I learned more from her than I did any other teacher I ever had. Golden eagles too. There was a golden eagle nest up on Polychrome Mountain, which they had a little closed area that I hiked around, but lots of goldens. I spent I went to Homer and Seward both. Took a couple of boat rides, seeing ocean, because the ocean's a mystery to me. It's just, I have no familiarity with the ocean. So it was really cool to do a couple of boat rides and enjoy the sea otters. I got really fun pictures of a sea otter eating a crab, you know, swimming on its back, eating a crab, and seagulls pecking at it, trying to get some of it, and I just didn't have time to include that. Sea lions, walls, massive walls of seabirds, kittiwakes, puffins. And I just love puffins. They're so cool. Whales, no good breaching or anything like that, but the whales are just so magnificent and so mysterious for me. And but then I went to this is when I was going from Seward over to Homer on the Kenai Peninsula, the Russian River. And these are sockeye salmon leaping the waterfall, the Russian River Falls. And this is what we used to have here. This is what we used to have. But these, I talked to the fisheries manager here, because when I'm in these places, I don't want to just like drive through and read the Interpretive brochure. I want to learn more. So I talked to the fisheries manager. These fish swim 75 miles from the ocean. And I just said, I'm sorry, that's just so not impressive. Our fish swim 900 miles at 6,500 vertical feet. Our fish, and this is a true story. This is why we should all care what's happening to them. Our fish are the superheroes of the salmon world. And we're losing them. And you probably all know that story, but it's worth it to get involved and try to bring them back. And the fisheries manager there had no idea that our fish did that.
Oh, really?
And he's like, yeah, he's like, 900 miles? Yeah, that's what I told him. Come to Idaho. But I really had a fun time. This is not like Brooks Falls or Katmai where the bears walk within 5 feet of you. These are wilder bears. And it's not really managed. There is a viewing platform above the waterfall, but you can get right down next to the water, and and these bears, there was actually a guy killed there a few years ago because he was stupid. Not to speak ill of the dead, but he was. But this particular bear, I really enjoyed watching because this bear would get in the foamiest, frothiest white water, and just her head sticking out, and plunge her head in, and every time come out with a fish. Wow. And then this pool, these are all this salmon. These are all fish. I don't know how well you can see that. She could have walked in there and probably gotten 2 or 3 at a bite, but she chose to get in the waterfall. I don't know why. Maybe fresher. Well, they weren't fresher. The same fish, but that's what she chose to do. It was so entertaining to watch her. And I saw her at the falls 3 different times. She did the same thing every time, but she got a fish every time she stuck her head in. And she was like, "What? Aren't you impressed?" She's such a gorgeous bear, and had 3 gorgeous cubs. And so it was just really entertaining. I spent a lot of time at the falls with the different bears, and I have photos of several different bears that I don't have time to go into. Drove on down on the Kenai Peninsula. This is Mount Iliamna with fireweed in the foreground, of course. I wish I had time to tell you the whole story, but I graduated from high school in 1975 in Parma, Idaho. Parked at this turnout to take this photo. I ran into one of my old high school teachers. It was so cool. And the only way we figured that out is he saw my Idaho license plate. He said, "5B, what county is that?" I said, "Blaine County." So we talked about 2C. "Oh, I went to high school in 2C. "Oh, I taught high school in 2C. Well, it was Mr. O'Neill. It was awesome. He was such a kind, good teacher, so patient, and it was just really, really great to reconnect with Joe O'Neill. Spent several days in Homer, being on the ocean and getting to see big ships with sunbeams on them, and again, the ocean is just a big mystery to me. And this eagle posed in front of Mount Redoubt for me. I was just so happy that that eagle sat there long enough for me to get that shot. That's the kind of beauty and awe that's going on all the time. Unless you're sitting idly at home, as Conrad Gessner said. He wrote that in the 16th century. I imagine there are a lot more people sitting idly at home or walking blindly around now than there were even in the 16th century. So I moved on. At this point, I'm heading to Denali. Spent several days hiking in Chugach State Park, which is a massive state park and just a lot of amazing mountains. Went back to Denali for a couple of weeks. And the caribou bulls had their full antler growth. At this point, they hadn't started stripping their velvet, but they did before I left. And they're just such gorgeous animals, those mature bulls with their white manes. And the tundra started, the color peaked in the tundra. So you can see this bull, and that's just miles and miles of valley floor covered in that kind of color. And that, if that doesn't change your perspective, nothing will. Just to encounter beauty like that. And I call this photo the 4 Kings. These are park animals. They're not hunted. So they weren't afraid of me at all. So these 4 guys just walked towards me, and I happily photographed them in that really colorful tundra. Bull moose, I'm not going to talk much about moose, just enough to say that Alaska moose are half again bigger than our moose here. We have the sheerest subspecies, and the Alaska moose are much larger. When I worked as a guide in Alaska, we packed them out on our backs. And I was a football player, wrestler. I thought I was pretty tough until I started having to pack a damn 1,500-pound moose out on my back and realized I wasn't. But they're just amazing animals. Doll sheep, real quick. I don't know what time. I should have had my phone here. Forget it. I had seen a couple of bands of doll sheep on Mount Margaret from the park bus the day before. So the next day I rode the bus in, got them to let me off, and I scrambled up Mount Margaret. Once you get on top of Mount Margaret, it's a long summit plateau. Not real wide, but I got to the top of Mount Margaret, and the wind was fierce. it had to be at least 50 miles an hour, and I was struggling just to be able to walk because I had my big pack with my big wildlife lens on and everything, and a lot of surface area. Got behind a nice big rock and was able to eat a little bit. Found the sheep that I'd seen the day before, probably a mile down the ridge line, and with that wind, there's no way I was going to try to get down and photograph them. And I had glassed all the way up. I was glassing, and once I got on top, I actually had to lie down. And then once I got over where I could get in the lee of the rocks, I was able to glass. Didn't see anything anywhere near. Finished eating, get a little bit of a drink of water. Decided to head back, and then I'm walking into the teeth of the wind. And I was thinking, I'm going to have to get down on my hands and knees to get out of here. And this guy popped up over the ridge. I had no idea where he'd been. But he was a park animal, not hunted, so he didn't care that I was there. Hung out, I had to sit down to photograph him because of the wind, but hung out for 20, 25 minutes, and then went down a different ridge than I was going to go down. And so it was really a great opportunity, a great experience to have him hang out with me for a while. And you can see the Alaska Range in the background, and that earlier picture I showed of the grizzly with the peaks. This peak, or this photo, speaks to me in the same way. And then the Denali grizzly. I saw so many bears. I walked probably at least 200 miles in the park, and encountered a lot of different bears. Again, I try not to be stupid about it. I don't. If you ever hear me call myself a grizzly expert, take my keys and don't let me drive, because I've lost it. Then I've lost my humility, and that's the worst thing you can do in grizzly country, just like skiing and avalanche terrain. But they are just magnificent animals. This guy was eating blueberries. And if you could zoom in, I can't, but if you could zoom in, that is blue froth from blueberry. I was doing the same thing, because at least 10 gallons of blueberries I know. But it was really fun to watch him eat blueberries, and this is what it's just blueberries everywhere in the tundra. And fresh organic blueberries, you can't beat them. But this is, that photo just says it all for me. That bear, and these are all different bears. I don't have photos of the same bear. They're all different bears. And this particular color phase is called the Toklat grizzly because of the Toklat River. One wolf. I've seen more wolves in Idaho this year than I saw on my whole trip in Alaska and the Yukon. Just the way luck goes. And then I was in Yellowstone in the spring and saw several more. But one wolf fairly close. And this, the bus drivers have a signal system. And this, I met a woman, a veterinarian from Fairbanks, and we were hiking, and she took this picture of me. But the bus drivers, when one of them sees an animal that they want to tell the other bus drivers what to look for, this means a caribou. Because caribou have those palmated, they call them shovels, in the front of their antlers. This means a moose. This means a grizzly. And I forget what the signal for wolf was. But so I'm just telling the bus driver there's a caribou ahead. And Margot took that photo. I thought it was pretty funny. This is just to give you a sense of the scale of the place. You can't see it. There's a tiny little orange dot there, and that's my tent. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the place. And at this point, it's late August. The tundra is peaking. The moose are getting ready to rut. Oh, another 15% day. This is from the top of Polychrome Mountain of Denali, and give you a sense just how massive it is. But the moose rut is about to begin, and the moose rut in Denali is famous because you have these massive bull moose which weigh 1,500 pounds and 72, 74-inch spreads on their antlers, and they're fighting, and they close sections of the park road where you can be on the park road but you can't get off the road during that time, because when those bulls are so engorged with the hormones, they don't care what they're charging. They can be really dangerous. But I left Denali and headed for the Yukon, because the only thing I planned on my whole, that I really planned on my whole trip, was a 6-day backpack trip in Tombstone Territorial Park in the Yukon. Drove the top of the World Highway. You can see it here, and you can see why it would be called that. And I took a couple of days driving that road, doing hikes off of it, and it occurred to me that to the south of this road, it's 350 miles to Whitehorse. No roads, no human habitations for 350 miles. It's 400 or 500 miles to the north, to the Arctic Ocean. No roads, no human habitations. It is truly wild country on a scale that we can't comprehend here anymore. Idaho used to be like that, of course. Hasn't been for a long time. We have great wilderness here, but not like this. And the silence, I mean, I could feel the silence that extended to the edge of the world. It was truly an awe-inspiring experience. And I learned that storms can come up more quickly here for some reason than any other place I'd ever been. There was one little cloud. I climbed a mountain and was having some good wildlife sightings. And there was a little cloud floating around. I didn't think too much about it. There were quite a few clouds, but one that was fairly close, I didn't think too much about. And within 15 minutes, it had turned into a torrential downpour. And I got soaked trying to get down off that hill. But just really a dramatic, I recommend taking that road. It's really wild country. And shooting this sunset, I had a grizzly foraging about 200 yards away from me, so I'm framing my photo, checking out the bear, which adds so much to the experience. When you descend to the east end of going to the top of the World Highway, and again, they use the term highway loosely. It's a dirt road the whole way. There's a ferry across the Yukon River. So I was able to load my truck in my little R-Pod on the ferry, got ferried across the Yukon, and visited Robert Service's cabin. This is Robert Service's actual cabin. How many of you read Robert Service? He's the true poet of the North. A contemporary with Jack London. And if you've never read The Cremation of Sam McGee, I recommend it. And I know people who can quote that whole thing verbatim. And once you read it, you'll understand why. But this is Robert Service's actual cabin in Dawson City. When I got across the Yukon, I was in Dawson City. This is the inside of his cabin. And the cabin I lived in was not as big as even this room. It was quite small. And there was a little amphitheater next to his cabin with a woman in period dress reading Robert Service's poems, and she would take recommendation. But really, really cool because growing up as a boy, Robert Service, Jack London, I mean, that's what I read. And to be in Dawson City and be in Robert Service's cabin, and then Jack London Square, like, I was in heaven. This was the realization of a lifelong dream. Jack London did not live in Dawson City. He lived on a cabin down on the Yukon River, which was disassembled and moved into Dawson City. My cabin was bigger than his, but smaller than Robert Service's. One thing that taught me was, when it comes down to what you need versus what you want, you don't need very much. There aren't many things you really need. I grew up with 7 siblings, and mom and dad, we were all big people, in a house of about 1,000 square feet. I don't recommend that. I don't wish that on anybody really, but you don't need as much as a lot of people have these days. So again, Jack London Square. Then I headed just a little way south of Dawson City. You can turn onto the Dempster Highway. Again, it's a highway. Yeah, it's a rough dirt road, but it goes all the way to the Arctic Ocean. The tundra was peaking in color. The Tombstone Range is also known as the Patagonia of North America. And I wish I could say that I had some great photos of those peaks, but I did a 6-day backpack trip here, and this is what the tundra looked like. The landscape outside of the major mountain range looked like. So I did a 6-day backpack, and this is these are not the main peaks. These are not why it's called the Patagonia of North America. I did the wettest backpack trip I've ever done in my life. It rained for 6 days. This is the only thing I got even close to a view of any mountains whatsoever. I got so tired of the sound of rain on nylon. But you deal with it. I had to go over a big pass to get into the next lake. This is Grizzly Lake. I went over to Talith Lake, and snow covered, and it was just miserable and rotten, and I loved every second of it. I really wanted some photos. I carried my big night sky photography lens, because there was a good chance of northern lights, a tripod, a wildlife lens, and I had a heavy pack, and this is the one photo I took. But it was okay. It was a great, awesome experience. Came out from the Tombstones, headed south towards Dawson City. It's 350 miles. Camped on the marge of Lake LaBarge. So if you've read The Cremation of Sam McGee, you understand where that phrase comes from. And that night, I got my aurora. And just had an amazing, like 4-hour-long display of the northern lights. And we're nearing the sunspot cycle on the sun. It's an 11-year cycle. We're nearing the 11-year solar maximum. So there's a really good chance over the next couple of years that we'll be able to see the northern lights here. In fact, I got some photos of the northern lights from the top of Butterfield Mountain over in the Wood River a month or so ago. And there's a really good chance that we're going to be able to see them a few times here. So keep your eyes out. And the Perseids meteor shower is peaking tomorrow night, so that's something to keep in mind as well. But I just love the aurora. When I lived in Alaska, it was something I just lived for in the fall and winter. And the aurora on December 1st, 1976 is the only thing I've ever seen that rivals the total solar eclipse that we had here in 2017. Just totally silent, but totally spiritual and awe-inspiring, and it just overwhelmed, and you could understand why ancient peoples who didn't really understand the science behind it would think there was something real significant about it. But the aurora was I just love it. It's remarkable. At this point, I'm kind of heading towards home. I'm well into September, and I'm well into my time limit here. This is the Rushing River. I spent a few days at Stone Mountain Provincial Park in British Columbia, home of the stone sheep, the other thin-horn species of sheep. Massive park. Have any of you ever heard of it? No. Yeah, that's what happens in these places. Just huge. No good maps that I could find. I climbed a peak and got this photo, but I saw this lake, so I backpacked into that lake. No map. I didn't need a map. But these are the stone sheep. Really interesting looking sheep. I didn't get any pictures of rams, but just to me they were kind of like a hybrid of the Dall sheep and bighorn sheep based on the coloration. But really interesting sheep, and at this point the birds are migrating, so a lot of great migrating birds around bodies of water, in particular waterfowl. And then I'm back in the Canadian Rockies, back into a lot more familiar terrain. This is right up at the boundary between Jasper and Banff National Park on the Icefields Parkway, and then Mount Athabasca and Andromeda, and a really cool place and some great hiking out of there. Peyto Lake overlook in Banff National Park. I've spent a lot of time in the Canadian Rockies, and I just love them. Bow Lake. And this was a hike that a woman I met had told me about. This is Bow Lake down here, and this is Iceberg Lake. That's the Bow Glacier. So that's the very origin of the Bow River, which flows through Banff. And really steep, scrambling, tough trail, route finding, but she'd given me pretty good directions, so I was able to get up to the lake and just really enjoyed an amazing view. And the Canadian Rockies, on my travels, I have never seen anything better than the Sawtooths, but I've seen a lot that equals the Sawtooths. And the Canadian Rockies are 1,000 miles of it. There's so much. They're just endless. And that just gives you a little sense. That's from the top of a peak I'd climb. Back in elk country, and at this point, it's the rut. Yeah, but just amazing animal. Obviously, I love elk, and spent a few days hiking around Kananaskis country, which is south of Canmore, not far north of the border. Really recommend. It's not that long of a drive from here, really. Big wild country. I've seen more grizzlies in Kananaskis country than I have in all the rest of Canada combined. Provincial parks, not national parks, so they're not nearly as crowded, and mostly pretty good trails. Alberta is now charging you have to buy an entrance pass to go spend time in the park, kind of like we tried here feudally a few years ago. But really remarkable, rugged country, and it's thousands square miles of country like that. But I love Kananaskis country. And then I'm back in Glacier National Park. Spent a few days in Glacier. These are some bighorn sheep bedded down right below the trail. This is Ptarmigan Lake. And I'm almost to Ptarmigan Tunnel. If you're familiar with Glacier, it has these famous rock fins that, looking at them from the side, they look like this, but if you look at them straight on, they look like that. And Ptarmigan Tunnel is a tunnel that was built through one of those rock fins. The Park Service, sometime in October, will go up and close big, massive steel doors on each side of that tunnel so it doesn't fill with snow, because if it did, it wouldn't melt. And then next spring, when the snow melts, they'll go open the doors and you can hike through, you can just pass into a drainage by hiking through one of those rock fins. It's pretty cool. And again, I love Glacier, and I've spent a lot of time in Glacier over the years, a lot of backpacking, and this is Swift Current Lake that you can drive to, and the Mini Glacier Lodge is on Swift Current Lake, and really remarkable place to stay, and obviously just stunningly beautiful. But, in the Milky Way over Swift Current Lake, Chief Mountain, which is sacred to the Blackfeet people, and you can see why. This aspen stand is by far the largest aspen stand I've ever seen. It's thousands of acres. It's just this amazing aspen stand, and in the fall, of course, just catches fire with color. So I did a day hike up to Cracker Lake. It's a fun day hike, 12 miles round trip, so an easy hike. I think you gain a couple thousand vertical. Beautiful lake, and I've camped here before, good place to see bears, and I watched this sow with two cubs swim the lake. And it's hard to see there, but I don't know why they swam the lake. I'm not a grizzly, and I didn't have a chance to ask her. But I watched her a lot, and they were just foraging in the brush, and didn't really get any good photos over that day. But I stayed up there pretty darn late, trying to get photos of her. So I hiked out, got to Swift Current Lake just as the sunset was happening, and that was my sunset. And it was powerful. There were two young men from North Carolina. I'm on a bridge over the outlet of Swift Current Lake. There were two young men from North Carolina standing next to me. We were just silent until the color faded, and I fell to my knees and wept. And they did the same thing, and they each put a hand on my shoulder. It was so powerful and so moving, and I just thought, what a perfect ending. But it wasn't the end. I wanted to get that sow and cubs. So I went back to Cracker Lake, hiked up before daylight, and passed a couple of piles of fresh grizzly scat on the trail that hadn't been there when I hiked out the evening before, but no cub tracks. So I thought, it wasn't that sow with cubs. So good chance they're still up there, and they were, so I spent the day with them, and just got some really fun photos of this sow and the cubs. Still didn't get to ask her why she swam the lake the day before, but just really good fun, long day, hundreds of photos of these bears, watching them forage. Stayed up there pretty darn late, later than I should have, hiked out, and that was my sunset. So, just completely different colors. I don't know why. Completely different colors, but it was just so powerful. And then that was the end. So, this is my hero, after Margaret. And I mean, that bear just says, that is wildness. That is the essence of wilderness. That is true wildness on a scale that we humans, I mean, when this bear walks through the landscape, it hears everything, it smells everything, it senses everything, it's aware of everything. And I'm driving through the landscape at 70 miles an hour with listening to music with the heater or the air conditioner on when the window's up, and no idea what's going on except that highway in front of me, and I'm really jealous of what this bear gets to experience. And so that was my trip. I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time. And this is how I hike: my camera, my bear spray, my binoculars, and
a smile on your face.
And a big smile on my face the whole way. I carry two weapons, Wayne. My brain, which is a weapon of mass destruction all too often, and my bear spray. But no firearms. You don't need firearms. Bear spray is a lot more effective at deterring bears, and it works. I've experienced it. It works. Thank goodness. But so anyway, any questions? Cool.
How long do they expect them to fix that bridge with fellow?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, so it'll probably be well into 25 before you can drive all the way to Kantishna again.
Boy, that's sad.
Yeah, considering what they're doing, and thank goodness for the infrastructure bill, because they got money from infrastructure to perfect timing. Yes, Michael.
Do you ever take photos with a mobile phone now?
I'm sorry?
Do you ever take photos with a mobile phone?
I do. Snapshots. Phones are amazing these days. It's pretty remarkable. It's kind of almost scary for a photographer who shoots with a 7-pound camera that you can do, especially on close-up shots. You can do the same thing with a phone. But where the difference is every one of the photos you saw of mine, you could blow up to 60 by 90. You couldn't do that with the phone. You just couldn't. But they do remarkable work.
Well, how many miles did you drive?
13,000 miles.
Wow.
And I paid over $10 a gallon for gasoline. I wanted to fly into the lake that I lived on when I lived in the bush. I really wanted to. I couldn't afford it. I wanted to go to McCarthy and fly in and do a backpack trip in the Wrangell St. Elias. I couldn't afford it. I could afford to get dropped off, but I couldn't afford to get picked up. So, seriously.
How long did it take Hailey to Alaska? Not counting all your driving around and all, like in Alaska.
That's the hard part, Megan. I probably could have done it in 3 days by just driving straight through. Probably 4 would have been better. But I did a lot of, kind of like if you've ever followed weasel tracks in the snow. That's how I was traveling. But there are definitely places I would recommend. I wasn't focused on driving the Alaska Highway, because a lot of people, that's their goal. They want to drive the Alcan. I wasn't focused on that. I was focused on seeing things, and seeing different places. Like driving the Cassiar was important to me. Because I've just read so much about it. I'm a voracious reader, and when I'm driving through these places, I look for bookstores because I want to buy books about local history, local wildlife, and so I had read a lot about the Cassiar and Dease Lake and places like that, so it was important to me to drive the Cassiar. Really important to me to see Tombstone. And that real quickly, at Tombstone Provincial Park, or excuse me, Territorial Park, because Yukon's still a territory, it's not even a province. The scale that forecasts the northern lights is called the KP scale. If you have a KP6, there's a good chance you will even see them in Idaho. KP7, really good chance. KP8, which we had here a while back, but we were cloudy. So I had the other factor is the BZ, and I forget what the BZ stands for. So you want a positive KP factor and a negative BZ factor, and I had a KP7, and I'm in northern Yukon. So that's why I carried my astrophotography lens and my tripod. I'm thinking, I'm going to get the aurora over the tombstones, reflecting then Talus Lake, and that was the picture I took in 6 days. But that's how it goes.
Did you keep track of how many miles you hiked?
I didn't, Margaret. I'm generally not a counter. The only reason I knew I drove 13,000 miles is because my truck told me.
Yeah.
I'm not a counter. I don't count vertical feet or miles. I just like I know where I want to go. I get there and come back. So, but I know it was in the hundreds of miles. I don't know if I did 1,000 miles, but I could have.
So I'm curious what you heard at night. Did you hear owls and wolves, and did you hear bears?
I heard wolves a couple of times. Didn't hear bears. I heard owls early season when they were mating. Pretty sure I heard a flammulated and great horned, of course. Didn't see any great grays. I was really hoping to see some great grays. Didn't see any great grays. But you know, for a big part of the time I was out, there wasn't night.
Yeah.
It just didn't get dark. So, yeah.
Ed, thank you so much for sharing this. This is great. Did you catch your dinner, or how did you manage your...
I didn't fish. I ate a lot of blueberries. I ate miner's lettuce sometimes. I didn't have a photo of them in here, but there's a berry called a melon berry, and it tastes just like watermelon. Small little berry, but it's not variegated like a raspberry or a strawberry.
What color it is?
Red. When they're ripe, they're red. They have a seed that's kind of annoying, but they taste just like watermelon. So I ate a lot of melon berries, especially along the Russian River. There were a lot of them there. Thimbleberries. So I ate a lot of berries, but mostly I would resupply. And what I normally do, I have a little portable barbecue grill, and I would grill enough meat and then freeze it to last me for several days. And then a lot of times I was out just wanting to do something really fast and easy, so I'd eat a lot of backpack meals, even when I wasn't backpacking. Then I just boil water and wait for 20 minutes, and then instant oatmeal and instant coffee, or actually a lot of pour-over coffee when I'm in my truck. But yeah, I love food, but when I'm out, food's just fuel.
So I have a question. Everett Roost was, it's R-O-O-S-T?
No, R-U-E-S-S, I believe. Young man who grew up in the Depression. His parents were teachers, and they had other kids, and they didn't have the money to feed all the mouths. So he would leave for months doing artwork. He was a very good artist, doing artwork and selling it in towns he went through in southern Utah for enough money for food, and he ended up doing well enough to buy a couple of mules. So he had pack mules, and remarkable story. I have 3 books on him at home. And he called himself a vagabond for beauty. I like that.
And the Immense World, is that?
An Immense World, yes. Ed Yong, Y-O-N-G. He also wrote I Am Multitude, An Immense World will just amaze you. You just like, because we assume that other species see the world and sense the world just like we do, and that is not so. And reading this book will really open your eyes to how limited our perspective is compared to a lot of other creatures.
What was Barry Lopez's book?
Embrace fearlessly the burning world.
And is that his last?
That was his last book. It's published posthumously, actually. I bought it in Whitehorse, and so really enjoyed reading it. But boy, Horizon, Arctic Dreams is one of the best books I've ever read. Barry Lopez, when we lost him, we lost a real national treasure. But Arctic Dreams is still one of the best books I've ever read.
So during your hiking, are you off the system trails a lot in your backpacking?
A lot, yeah. And in Denali there aren't any systems. Well, there's one trail that leads out of Savage River, and it's pretty fun, if that's all you have time to do. But in Denali there aren't any trails. So you just get the bus to drop you off and hike up a drainage, and if you can get across the river that you have to cross, and just make your own way. And then find your way back to the park road, wherever you end up landing on the park road, flag down a bus, and get a ride out. Yes, sir.
So, in one of Lopez's books, I'm sure you know which one, he writes about an encounter with a grizzly, and he's with indigenous people, and he writes, I saw a noun, they saw a bear as a bird. But then I have a question for you. So, you're a professional photographer. You have a lot of skill at this. Are there times when you are so struck in awe and wonder where you don't even take a photo? You just experience the experience.
Yes. It's rare. But sometimes it's just like, well, the eclipse was one of those times. We had 2.5 minutes of totality. So many people were saying, oh, I bet you're going to get some great photos. Like, no, I didn't even take my camera. For one thing, I was working. But for another thing, we had 2.5 minutes. I didn't want to worry about getting the exposure right, the composition. I wanted to just experience it, and it was the right choice. It just, because it was, how many of you saw the actual totality? It was amazing, wasn't it?
It was amazing.
Well, when that orb in the sky that all of our life depends on disappears, and just a ring of light, that was powerful. But you know, I said when I retired, because I've done a lot of slideshows. You two have been to quite a few of my slideshows over the years. I've done a lot of slideshows over the years, mainly about this place. I said when I retired, okay, no more of that. And I've probably done 10. But my dad was an evangelical Baptist preacher. I'm not a Baptist. But I inherited some of that evangelical fervor for the things that I care about and that I'm passionate about. And you know, you might, real quickly, Lynn, you may ask yourself, if you're seeking beauty, why do you have to leave here? And it's a legitimate question. But this year is 50 years that I've been hiking around this. I did my first backpack trip in the Sawtooth Wilderness 50 years ago this year. And I was at a lake in the White Clouds summer before last, waiting out a thunderstorm, a high trailless lake that's pretty hard to get to, waiting out a thunderstorm in my tent, just lying there thinking, I've been to that lake. I've camped at that spot over 30 times in my life. And so I like to get out. And George Santayana said, the only cure for birth and death is to enjoy the interval. So I'm trying really hard to enjoy the interval. So Lynn, thanks, and thanks for your patience.